So now I've got the edit laid out, the next thing to do is to do a bit of trimming. First of all, I just want to show you a few things about getting around the timeline, obviously the timeline being where your edit is laid out. First off, as I drag through the timeline here, you can hear the audio scrubbing in the background. This is normally on as the default, but if it isn't, you turn it on by clicking up to timeline and then audio scrubbing. I've just been muting it so it didn't get in the way of my voice, but that has been on all the time. If you untick it, then when you drag around, you don't hear a thing. I mention that because sometimes it seems to have been off on certain timelines that I'm using, and I do want to hear the audio scrubbing, so I turn it back on again. Obviously, looking at all the drop-down menus, amazing stuff to do with the timeline you can get to from the timeline menu, and there is a lot of it. Now, most of it I would say just leave as it is for the moment, and you'll get to learn it as you're using Resolve. There's also a whole bunch of keyboard shortcuts which are nice to use, and you can customize them, and I'll go through some of those as we do a bit of trimming. On the timeline here, obviously you've got some video tracks and audio tracks. You can have as many as you like. If you want to put in more, you just right click on the track header over here and say add track or add tracks. So add track, just put me in another video track. Add tracks lets you say how many tracks you want and where they're going to go. And on the audio side, what kind of track they are, which I haven't really explained yet. If you want to get rid of a track, you just right click on it and say delete track. If you decided you wanted that to be moved up, so sometimes, I've got stuff on this track and I wish the track was a bit higher up in the stack, then you've got to right click on it and say move track up. You can't just pick it up and move it, which I can do in some programs. As you can see, if I want it to be bigger or smaller, I can just grab hold of the top and drag it, same here. But I can also do that by accessing this little gizmo over here. Now this thing here, timeline view option, pops up a little box with lots of different things on top of it. So along the top you've got these three things: stacked timelines, subtitle tracks and audio waveforms. So firstly, going backwards, audio waveforms, pretty simple, turns off the display of the audio. Now if your audio track is really small and there's not space for it, you won't see it. But you get a reasonably sized track, you can see the audio waveform, but you can turn it off if you don't want it. This is made up in the background whenever you load up a clip, so sometimes you'll put a clip on the timeline, you won't see it, it will come up eventually. It's also stored in your Resolve folder. So if you remember right at the start, we set up a folder on the D drive and I told it to put all the temporary files into there. Well, if you go into the cache clip folder, there is your list of audio waveforms. And you can see I've already got a bit in here for all sorts of things. I can't access these files in any other way. They mean nothing at all to me, so I hardly ever look at them, but they are there. This is also where if you put any effects on there, they'll get rendered to. Sometimes I find that gets a bit big, so I do come in here and sometimes just delete the whole thing and start again, because this is all temporary stuff. This is not the important stuff. If I was to delete that, it would have to remake them, but it would still do that. Along the top here, this one obviously displays subtitle tracks or not. I'm not going to do subtitles, so I don't need any subtitle tracks, but if you ever do, I actually have got a tutorial about that on my website, but if you ever do, it's got a nice subtitle editor inside of Resolve. And this one shows stacked timelines. So if I tick it, nothing immediately happens apart from it suddenly shows me timeline 1 there. That wasn't there before. That's because now if I have multiple timelines, which I do not, but let's make a copy of that one. Just right click on it and say duplicate. I've now got two timelines and I can have both of them open at the same time. And sometimes if I'm doing a big project, I will split things up into small sections and have one timeline for each scene, which I then put into a master timeline. That's why you might have multiple timelines. Well, the stacked timelines thing lets you see them at the same time. Once you've got the little tab up there, you can click on this thing and you can go to another timeline. It's not letting me because they're both already seen, but suppose I did that, I could choose this one and then go to the timeline you can't see. This is fine, but sometimes if you've got lots of timelines, it opens up a lot. That's going to be using memory. It might affect your performance. You can close them down. So if I was to open that up, I can close it by pressing that little X or right clicking on it and say close this one or close all other ones. And you can see also by right clicking on the tab, you've got things for renaming and that kind of stuff. So, you can get rid of them, but sometimes it's just irritating to have lots of them open. So you can go back to the way that Resolve used to work, which is not having stacked timelines. So let's turn that off. Now I don't have stacked timelines. I've got just the one timeline showing, but I can pop between them just by either double clicking on the timeline or coming up to above the recorder window here and choosing the timeline that I want to see. So again, I've only got 2. You might, if you've got say 30 or 40 timelines, you can have a huge list here. Normally it's in the order of the one you last opened, but that can be changed in the preferences. So if you come up to Resolve Preferences and go to the User Preferences, down here you've got the timeline sort order, and you can change that, as it says, alphabetical, the date they were created, or the recently used order, which is the one that it defaults to. That'll just change the order of this list in here. And that's just something they added in a couple of versions ago, and frankly was a great benefit if you had lots of timelines. I don't need that because I've only got one timeline, so it doesn't really matter. Next thing you've got here is how the video appears and the audio appears. So at the moment it's showing me every single frame. So if I zoom in a bit, it'll try and show me every single frame. Now this particular picture does not represent a frame of video, pretty much like every other video program at the moment, because a frame of video in this case I've gone all the way down to the bottom, and a frame of video is just that. So it doesn't really represent it, it represents something that's around about there, because how large these pictures can be will depend on how high or how tall your timeline is, so they can't really represent a segment of time. But again, that's pretty much like all other editing programs. Let me just zoom out a bit. Obviously zooming in and out just by using the plus and minus buttons. The other options you've got, which are pretty straightforward, is show everything, show just the head and tail, show nothing. Then on the audio you can show 2 different types of audio waveform. So that's one you'll be familiar with if you're using Premiere. It's just showing you the audio from nothing to loud, whereas this kind of waveform is the kind of waveform you see in most editing programs. You can get the waveform to fill the entire thing, or leave a little gap at the bottom so you can see the name, and you can put borders on them, which I think are very hard to see. I can't hardly see a difference between those two. There's a little bit, but not much. Finally, you've got these things which let you change the height of the audio and the video. So this has all audio and video tracks. I only got one track, but obviously if I had 5 or 6 and I did that, it would change the height of all tracks. I do use that quite a bit. So if I've got quite a few tracks and I want to see it, especially if I'm on a single screen, I can whack them down to that and I can see the lot very easily. Same with the audio, rather than having to go through and do one at a time. Along the top you've got a bunch of buttons, and we'll come to some of those as we're doing a bit of editing. And then over here you've got the zooming. So obviously that one zooms it in and out, or you can use plus and minus. This will show you the whole timeline. So you click on that, you're suddenly seeing the whole timeline. This one zooms it down so you're quite a bit closer, and this is a custom zoom, which will zoom it to whatever this was set to last. So if I did say that, pop to that, and want to go back, I can just do that and I get back to what I was here. And you can also do the same thing with keyboard shortcuts. If you want to know the keyboard shortcuts, the simplest thing is to go up to the view heading and look for zoom, and it says, oh look, zoom to fit is shift and Z, zoom in is control plus equals, and zoom out is control plus minus. You might want to change those to something that's a bit snappier or that you're used to. Actually, the one I use a lot of the time is if you hold down on the Alt key and you use the mouse wheel, it will zoom in and out around wherever your playhead is. Pretty sure it's the same as Premiere, so if you're in EDS, use control and mouse wheel. But that's getting around the timeline itself. Over here, I've got some audio levels. If I press that button, you can see you've got the levels popping up and down here. They don't have to be here. That's because I've clicked this little mixer button. So with the mixer off, you've got no levels there. You do have a little level display there, but you don't have any levels here. If you like those, click on those. Now, at the default, I've got meters for everything, but I can come to my little dots here and say just meters as opposed to mixer. You can change the volume that the stuff's playing back by using this slider. Now that doesn't affect the volume of your final file. If you put it down to that so you can't hear anything, your final file's still going to have sound in it. This is literally taking what's coming out and just changing it. And particularly there's this dim button here. So if you're busy playing away, you press the dim button, the sound just drops a bit. So imagine you're sitting there with somebody else going over an edit. You don't want to fiddle with the sound or come in here and change everything, but you want to actually just make it a bit quieter so that you can actually talk to somebody. Well, you just click that and it goes a bit quieter. So loads and loads of different ways of going around, and of course there's lots and lots more stuff. Just like every other program, you can get to things by right-clicking on the clips, by right-clicking on the ruler, by right-clicking on the track header, and by searching the menus. And of course there are loads and loads of keyboard shortcuts. I've left them at the default for Resolve. but you can change them. If you come up to the DaVinci Resolve heading and then go Keyboard Customization, you then bring up a thing that lets you change the keyboard shortcuts. Now, I am not going to change them. I'm going to leave them at the defaults, but you could, for example, pop up here and choose some pre-made ones. So suppose you're coming from Premiere, you could use that, and now you're using keyboard shortcuts which are pretty similar to what you'd use in Premiere. I'll put it back on the Resolve ones. And you can make up your own. So if you wanted to change the keyboard shortcut for clip duration, you click on this and you would type something. So I just randomly chose M, and it's saying, hang on, M is already assigned to add a marker, so do you really want to do it? Well, I don't, but if you did, you'd assign it. Now, again, not going to go into that, but if you ever wanted to fiddle with it, that's where it is. And it is fairly obvious how to do that. I'm going to discard all that and just get back to plain editing. So anyway, that's a quick tour of the actual timeline. Now what I want to do is come through and trim this stuff. So we've got the start of the timeline where Ringo comes in, says hi, sits down and says David. Now when we filmed this, we did the wide shot with him coming in and then the whole conversation, and then we did the close-ups. In the close-ups, Ringo didn't sit down. So he starts saying David already in the seated position, whereas here, he's kind of still sitting down and moving at the same time. So that's one of the things I have to tidy up. In particular at the moment, I just don't want two Davids, because he says, David, twice. Well, I don't want that. I definitely want one of the Davids. And this sound is better than that sound, so I want this one. The way I put it in wasn't thoroughly accurate. You can see I've just chopped off the front here, so I'd like a little bit more of that, and I'd like a little bit less of that. Trimming clips in Resolve is very similar to a lot of other programs. So mainly you would come down here, grab something and drag it. You can see it's snapping to the playhead there. It's also snapping to the sides of the clips. Now if I don't want it to snap, I can come up to the little magnet icon and turn it off, or press the N key as it says. And now I can move it around a bit more freely. But yeah, I've now chopped off the words David. I need a bit more of this because I've managed to come in halfway through the word. So grab hold of that end there and drag. Now I get
David, I wanted to ask you about AVC HD.
Yep, and now I've got that whole thing in there. Of course, I've created a gap, so that's not ideal. What I really want to do is get rid of that gap so it goes from that to that. So I'm going to go to the gap itself, select it by just clicking on the gap, right click and say ripple delete, and that's got rid of my gap. I could have done that a lot quicker by using a different method, but that's one way of doing it. So now I get...
Hi. David, I wanted to ask you about AVC HD.
Yeah, sounds fine. Doesn't say David twice.
About
There is another problem, which is he's still moving as he sits down, but I'm going to come back to that one. I'll just do simple stuff to start off with. Let's come to this join.
easy is it to edit?
Well, it's pretty easy to edit. How easy is it to edit, he says. And then I've got a bit of rubbish back here. Well, I don't really want that. I'd like to trim it off to there. Now, I could do what I did before. Grab hold of it, drag, decide where this wants to start, and then delete the gap. But I don't want to do that because that's a bit boring, so let's undo it. Instead, I want to do the whole thing in one go. To do that, just go into ripple mode. I'm on this little arrow here, which is your normal editing mode. Then you have these other editing modes up here, and I need to go to this one. And I called it ripple mode. It's actually called trim edit mode in here. I call it ripple mode in other programs. And if I click on that, then I can come down here, grab hold of the end there, drag it, and it moves everything down and closes the gap straight away. I can do the same thing here, just grab hold of that, drag, and it closes up the gap. Go back and play that.
Easy is it to edit? Well, it's pretty easy to edit the stuff these days.
And yeah, that's okay. Yep, job done, I think. Let's go to the next join.
Ages, but you don't have to do that anymore. And Sony and Panasonic.
And yeah, the end of that one's okay. The start of that one's a bit off, so again, I could still stay in trim mode. Grab hold of the join there and drag it that away.
But you don't have to do that anymore. And Sony and Panasonic cameras?
That's created a nice edit. Yeah, that's okay. So this one
started. Is there a big difference between the footage? Again, when we first started.
And yeah, that's got it down to the words. It seems a bit fast. It seems a bit too quick. Maybe I want a bit more of me. As I'm in trim mode, I can just come down to me, click on the edge and drag, and just add a bit in. So a bit of breathing space.
But you don't have to do that anymore. And Sony and Panasonic cameras?
If I was in the normal mode, and I started dragging that, it would just wipe out the other one. Or if I drag it the other way, it would leave a hole. So that's the difference, obviously, between trim mode and not trim mode. Just undo that to go back to where I was happy with it.
Do that anymore. Footage. Again, when we first...
Here, that's probably all right, but suppose I wanted to trim that off, I could do the same thing. I could go into ripple mode, or I could use a different way of trimming. What I like to do a lot on my tutorials is I'll put a clip on the timeline, and then I'll go through and mark in and out points and then chop those bits out. It's just a different way of editing. I just want to chop out that little section in the middle. So I'm going to go here and mark an in point, just like I did on the clip. Go here and mark an out point. Again, like on our clip, but it's down on the timeline. And I want to get rid of that little section of timeline. So basically it's ripple delete that section of timeline. It is very easy. It's just press the delete key.
The footage. Again, when we first started.
Now, the only thing I should mention there is the delete key does work slightly different inside of Resolve to every other program that I've used, in that it always does a ripple delete. And in preference, if you've got something selected, it will delete the thing you've selected rather between in and out points. So for example, suppose I've got that selected. I've got in and out points on the timeline. I press delete, the clip disappears. That's not what I wanted to do. In this case, if I'd marked an in and out point and the clip was selected, I'd have to click off the clip first and then delete to do the ripple delete. You'll also notice, of course, when I've got the clip selected, the in and out isn't highlit. So you know the wrong thing's selected. Even if you've got a clip somewhere else in the timeline selected that you can't even see, you know it's wrong because you can't see the bit in the middle being highlit. But if that ever happens, just click off it to a blank space. That gets rid of it. The other thing to be aware of with the delete key is if you've got a clip on another track. So suppose I went and just grabbed another bit of random clip here. Let's just take that one. And I've put that clip on there and I don't want it. In every other editing program, I would press delete and it would get rid of it and leave everything intact. Here, it always ripple deletes it. Doesn't matter if you're in trim mode or normal mode, it always ripple deletes it. And you notice it's chopped out a large chunk of Ringo's dialogue. So you've got to avoid that as well when you're doing it. It's very simple to do that. Let's just undo it. If I want to delete that, instead of pressing the delete key, use the backspace key. And it goes. You could also cut it, which is Control X. I always use the backspace key unless I want to ripple delete something. Once you get used to that, it's nice and easy. That is something which has messed a few people up when they started using Resolve. Is, bits disappearing off the timeline because they've just pressed the delete key rather than something else. Anyway, let's go to the next one. So let's go here.
Let's just really take the stuff. Wonderful.
Probably a bit short on me, so let's go into trim mode. Drag me out a bit more. And on Ringo, yeah, there's a bit too much of a
wonderful
sharp intake of breath, so I'd like to chop it back to there. Now, again, I could do in, out, delete. If I do that one, by the way, let's just delete that, have a look at it, and
take the stuff. Wonderful. And stuff. Wonderful.
There is a bit of a jump there. When I set those in and out points, my cursor didn't exactly go to the end of that clip. If you look at it closely enough, it's Alt and mouse wheel. You see my in point is not exactly in the right place because when I was dragging this around, it's not snapping to the joins. That's why having snapping enabled is good, because I go to the joins and I'd have done that. But I'm not even going to use those in and out, so let's just get rid of them, which I used a keyboard shortcut to do, which is Alt and X, and do this in a different way. And what I'm going to do is trim the start of the clip. So basically put the cursor there and say, I want this clip to start here, please. Now to do that, what you're going to do is come up to trimming and look for this trim starts. Obviously that trims the start of the clip, that trims the end of the clip. You also notice the keyboard shortcut is Shift plus square bracket. But if I do that, it'll chop the clip back to that point. Now it's left a hole, so obviously I could select that and ripple delete. But I can do that all in one hit by, instead of being in the normal mode, going to trim mode and then saying trim start. And now it chops the end of that clip off and moves it down the timeline.
Really take the stuff.
It's also possible to do it with a keyboard shortcut, of course. Now you'll notice that on trimming here, the keyboard shortcut is Shift and square bracket. So if I say Shift and square bracket, okay, it trims it, but it leaves a hole. So let's undo that. I can do the ripple trim start by holding down Control, Shift and square bracket. And I can do that whilst I'm not in trim mode, which is quicker. And of course you might want to go through and assign different keyboard shortcuts to those. In other programs I use that trim start and trim end a lot, so I'd probably assign some easier to remember keyboard shortcuts, but they are there up under trim. Anyway, let's carry on to the final one.
Well, my personal favourite is
Okay, so here again I need to trim that, so I can do any of those options. Well, I want to stick the playhead there, so I just grab the playhead and let go of it. I want to leave it there and do that trim start thing. But you might notice as soon as I let go,
Well, my personal favourite is
it carries on playing. And that is because, press the play button, it carries on playing. You can grab the cursor and move it around. You can do all sorts of things. I could start trimming that if I wanted to. And it still carries on playing. Most editing programs will stop playing if you grab the playhead or something. Again, it's just slightly different and something actually I have found very useful because I can start doing stuff whilst I'm listening to my audio and edit a bit quicker. But you kind of have to get used to it if you're coming from another program. So in this case, well, I could let it play, put the cursor there, and I can actually mark an in point and an out point, and then do a ripple delete, all without the thing actually stopping playing. But if I want to do something like that trim start, I've got to stop it, then put the cursor there, and then do the keyboard shortcut for trimming the start off. Okay, let's move along to the end here. So let's just look at this edit.
Much like editing DV footage.
I think I might have cut myself a little bit off there, and I'd really like that one to start there. So simplest thing is, again, go into trim mode, drag that one out a little bit.
Editing DV footage.
Yep, that's okay, and drag that one across.
Footage. Thank you very much, David. You're welcome.
And do the same at the end.
Very much, David. You're welcome.
Yeah, maybe coming a bit too quickly at the end there.
Very much, David. You're welcome.
Yeah, that'll do. So I've gone through and I've trimmed all of those clips, so I've got better joins on the lots. But I want to go a bit further. Right, at the start here, I mentioned that he's still sitting down as he says David. But it's quite clear in the close-up that he is sitting down, so it doesn't quite match that. If I was to drag this out and add in the other David...
David, I wanted to ask you about ABC.
Okay, that works because he sat down, but the sound is different because the wide shot was done with the microphone on the camera and this was done with a directional microphone. So really what I want to do is have the sound from this appear over here with the visuals from that. But every time I go to trim something, it does everything, it grabs everything. Again, you'll be familiar with this kind of thing if you're used to other editing programs, and the solution is pretty much the same. The easiest way to do it is not have anything selected, hold down on the Alt key, go to the thing that you want to trim, so in this case I want to do the audio, and then just drag it out. So I could just go there, grab, drag, and it wipes over that one. Now the David there isn't exactly in the right place, and you can tell, because I was dragging this, it wiped over the audio on this track, but all the other tracks, because this is a surround sound clip, it's got 5 other tracks, they all have David on as well. So the David should really be there, but on the other hand, can you really tell by looking at the wide shot that he's not saying David at the right point? If you need to shuffle this over, what you could do is go to it and chop out the word David itself. That's obviously the word David there. And what I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the razor blade. So I'm going to click on the razor blade and put in a cut just there. So now it's chopped out the word David on its own. Then I'm going to grab hold of this and move it across so it matches the other David.
David, I wanted to ask you
and that's nearly right. I could make it a bit better. Let's just zoom in a bit and I can grab hold of it and move it slightly. It's I only need to move it a frame or so.
David, I wanted...
As I was moving it there, you could see that I was getting up something telling me how much I was moving it. See, that is basically 1 frame. And of course, if it goes to the end, it's snapping. But no, I want to go to about there.
David, I wanted to...
And that's good enough. What I also want to do, though, is get rid of all this other stuff, because I don't need those 6 other tracks, but I was going to come back to that. But that's how I would do what we call an L cut. It's basically holding down on the Alt key. I would do that at other cuts, not just where the visuals don't match, but sometimes it's just nice to have the sound and picture at different points. So take this one.
Well, it's pretty easy to edit the stuff.
I might want to see me first over Ringo's words, because it helps to sell the cut if the picture and the sound aren't in the same place. Again, you go to those 2. Now, on the trimming here, up to now I've been grabbing one side or the other side. So you notice the way the cursor moves there. That little cursor means I'm editing this side. That little cursor means I'm editing that side. The dual cursor means I'm editing both. Now in this case it makes not a lot of difference. If I click on that and drag, it wipes out some Ringo. If I click on that and drag, it wipes out me. If I click on the middle and drag, it's doing the same thing. It's either wiping out Ringo or wiping out me. So they all appear to do exactly the same thing right now. It will have a difference though when you go into trim mode. Because in trim mode, if I was to grab that and start dragging, I add more of me in. Or if I was to take Ringo, I have less of Ringo or more of Ringo. If I do the one in the middle, you'll notice the two clips don't start moving around. They stay exactly where they are. They don't add in more stuff. And they just change the join between the two of them. So that's the difference between them, doing one side or the other side or the middle. It really has an effect in trim mode as opposed to regular mode. Anyway, I'm going to go back to regular mode, and what I want to do is to get a bit of me over the top of Ringo. So again, if I drag that, it's doing the sound as well. What I want to do is just drag the video. So again, Alt, click, drag.
How easy is it to edit?
Well, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, maybe a bit too much. Let's just bring it in there.
How easy is it to edit?
Well, it's pretty easy.
Yeah, let's go to the next edit. Now again, to get to the next edit, I could just grab hold of this thing and move around. But to jump between edits, you use the up and down arrow keys. So I could just use that to jump to my next edit. And again, I could get Ringo to come in earlier. So once more, I could just hold down an Alt, grab hold of that, and move it away that way.
Yeah, take ages, but you don't have to do that anymore.
And Sony and Panasonic cameras?
Yep, let's go to the next edit. I want to do the same here.
Between the footage?
Again, when we first started.
And maybe a bit of me, or maybe I want Ringo to carry on a bit. So I could do the same with Ringo. I could hold down an Alt and do that. If you get bored with holding down on Alt, you can click this little link button up here. If that's not highlight, when I grab it, it automatically just does the audio or the video. It doesn't do both. Now I don't have to hold on Alt to achieve it. But the downside is that if I grabbed hold of that video and moved it, I can move it out of sync with the audio.
In Panasonic cameras, is there a big difference?
Now I do get these little red indicators saying you've moved it out of sync, so you can move it back in. And when you get it back into sync, they go away. But that's the downside of not having the linked selection on, is you can accidentally put things out of sync. On the other hand, if you're doing this kind of trimming, it's actually a bit quicker.
Just really take the stuff.
Wonderful. And
like here,
Take the stuff.
wonderful.
I might want a bit more Ringo, so let's leave that off. Grab hold of this, bit of Ringo over me.
All the programs just really take the stuff.
Wonderful.
Unfortunately, he looks at the flipping camera when he starts talking. So in fact, I've got to go the other way. I've got to take it that away.
Take the stuff.
Wonderful. And what is the best program to edit AVC HD on?
Well, my personal favourite is.
Same thing here, maybe have a little bit more Ringo.
HD on.
Well, my personal favourite.
Nope, he looks at the camera again. Just drag it that direction.
Edit AVC HD on.
Well, my personal favourite is.
Doing all this by dragging, of course there are keyboard shortcuts to it. My favourite keyboard shortcut for trimming edges and for nudging and moving stuff are the comma and the full stop keys, although I look at them as see those little kind of arrows that's on there as well. Because we're using that, you can actually select a join and then move it one frame one way or one frame the other day. Just by repeatedly pressing it, I'm moving that around.
Best program to edit AVC HD on?
Well, my personal favourite.
Yep, I've gone through now and I've got the audio and the video at different points, just because that helps sell it a bit more.
Much like editing DV footage.
Thank you very much, David.
You're welcome.
Oh, he looks at the camera again there. Let's select that one. Comma, 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 comma. Till he's no longer looking at the camera. But let's have a bit more of him in there.
Pretty much like editing DV footage.
Thank you very much, David.
You're welcome.
Yep, that's it. Coming back to this one, the only thing I don't like, because I actually chop this up, is there's a little bit of empty space in there. And naturally, dialogue has a bit of a hiss, and I kind of want to make sure that I don't leave any space. And I don't want to have a complete blank, because people might hear that. So I'm just going to grab the ends of those two and make sure it doesn't have any space around it.
David, I wanted to ask you about AV.